Howdy, howdy.
Uh,
Right. Okay. Da-da-da.
all right. Got a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I sent a payment reminder to Polly as well. I mean, not that I think that's going to do anything, but I don't know. We got a meeting scheduled for the Amanda lead on Tuesday though. So
That's excellent.
highest possible signal is that it's coming from Amanda. Amanda doesn't fuck around. So we have so much shit in the air right now, dude. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
All right, ready? Going in. All right, everyone. We are live again with office hours. Today, we're talking about why smart founders fail to scale. Have you ever wondered why some founders, even with great teams, amazing products, and sufficient funding, still fail to scale at their companies? It's a common challenge that many smart founders face, but what separates those who succeed from those who don't? One of the most consistent factors we've seen is the ability to explain their business with clarity. Successful founders can jump on a call and articulate their vision, and more importantly, their team members can do the same. This clarity in messaging allows businesses to achieve incredible results, such as closing more deals, securing higher quality contracts, attracting more interest from investors, and generating greater enthusiasm, drawing in top tier talent to join their organization. In this episode, we dive deep into why clarity in messaging is so crucial for growth and how it can be the game changer that you need. Join us. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So,
if you weren't saying this like you were on a television ad, that might actually be effective copy. Okay, so
we got to do
what
intros first.
what that actually means, and this is something we've seen with our own clients in the work, and we just analyzed this today, right? Where it's like we looked at our top 6 companies that we worked with, right? And we looked at them, it's like they're all killers, right? They're all guys who are like, oh wow, you guys are having trouble scaling or launching or whatever. And again, like these are not folks you would look from the outside and think there's any issues, right? Or anything like that. And there's nothing catastrophic. It's just the startup grind. But you get inside and things like, oh wow, killer product, killer team. You're not having funding problems at this point. So what's the issue? And then often we'll sit down with the founder and it'll be like an hour in, and I'm like going, okay, I'm not So wait, so what exactly do you guys do again? Right, and we get that. And one of the things we've noticed is that for people who don't have that trouble, or at least know what they do, like clarity of messaging, clarity of mission, clarity of thought, clarity of communication, just clarity across the board ends up being a defining factor where it's like, oh, they're not have, it's not that they don't have new stuff they need to do. It's that they're so clear on what they do. It's just, it's a matter of execution at that point, right? It's not there's nothing for them to have to figure out. So let's dive into this a little bit. So Garrett, what's been some client stories you can share? Because again, I don't want to have to name folks if we do that, where they should have had everything figured out, but they didn't exactly, right? There was some issue, there's some fault, or there's some, some failing there.
Well, it's typically like the most common thing. I think the most universal problem between people that we work with is you have technical founders that have a very, very cool product that solves a real problem. But as a consequence, because it's a real serious problem that's solved in a real technical way, that it ends up being wildly difficult to explain. And this is even this week, which I think we could, one of our clients thought that their core benefit of their product was security, right? There is a very large security vulnerability that exists in everything in the world. I'm going to be somewhat vague here. But because it's a ubiquitous security vulnerability, and because it's a very edge case thing, it would be an international issue if this security vulnerability were exploited. It's something that everyone has kind of accepted as normal, right? So something that I've found in this particular instance, in trying to explain the security benefit of things to people, it's very difficult if they have not had their security violated in some way, right? So with myself as an example, I bought a used Kia Forte 2021 last year, right? And I didn't realize when I was getting it why it was hard to insure, right? Because I was looking at different insurance people. They're like, we're not going to insure this. I was like, what the hell, Geico insured me. I don't like Geico, but they were the only people that did. So I have to eat that. I just always hated their advertising. It's a very sad day that I had to get Geico. I was very upset, but I did. And so 2 weeks after I got my car, it got broken into. And I learned about the Kia Challenge, which is apparently a TikTok trend where people break into 2011 to 2021 Kias and Hyundais because they have a very basic security vulnerability in that you can pop the key goes in off and then stick a flash drive in it and then force start it. And it does not need the key to be in the car for the car to be started. So people, kids on TikTok will steal Kias and joyride them and crash them, right? So fortunately, they failed to steal mine. I don't know if it got fixed while it was at the dealership or whatever, but I came down one morning, shortly after I got my nice new car, which I love dearly, and my windows smashed in and the stuff ripped off and everything like that, right? So it's like, wow, this sucks. And that day, I ordered a steering wheel lock, and I went to my apartment and got an external garage. And I was now somebody that was concerned about security where I had never been concerned before.
Right.
So
go.
Wrapping up. This is a little long-winded, but the point here is that historically, security is really hard to sell. You need a special kind of person to be interested in security before they've had an issue with security, right? You probably don't, most people probably don't start using different complicated passwords for everything until they've had an account hacked or their identity stolen or something like that, right?
Yes.
So while their product is uniquely secure in a way that nothing else in the market is, that is not a great selling point, unfortunately, right? People don't understand the importance of it. However, what we discovered this week while working on their pitch is their product happens to enable you to make a certain piece of very large and important infrastructure 8 times bigger, in terms of the raw power of it, which if you make that thing 8 times bigger, you're able to put 8 times as much stuff on it at the same time without having to daisy chain different devices together which makes that very little latency, and thus it is 1,000 to 10,000 times faster using their product. So even though like we've been in talks with this company for 2 months, going through like the
We've had, hours and hours of discussion,
yeah.
and this piece kept getting brought up as like, oh, this is this cool thing. But doing that, but then we keep going into this other thing, and we're kind of just banging it around and going, well, does it work this way? Does it work this way? We couldn't do it until we realized, oh, that's way easier to sell. That's way, and it's way, and we'll get many more eyeballs looking at it that way.
Yes. So the point here, which I know that was a little bit vague, I'm trying to be respectful, but the team themselves who built this thing thought that the actual unique selling proposition was different than what we discovered the most exciting part of it is. And this is something that happens when you are close to your product. Like there are some people who you could think like real estate investors who probably are not in love with any particular house that they buy. But usually founders are in love with their thing that they're working on. People should try and minimize the amount that they're in love with it. You're probably not going to succeed at this. You have to be kind of obsessed with your stuff. But when you're in love with something, you've missed the important parts. There are secret little details that you think are amazing, and there are big glaring obvious things that you don't notice because you're so close to it. And so
so actually here I want to go into that. The problem then with this, when you are too close and in love, is that you start talking about the wrong things, and you start talking about them in the wrong, or you may talk about the right things but in the wrong order. So for example, one of our other clients basically went through their process, and basically and this founder is like stereotypically obsessed visionary founder, like crazy, where you look at this individual and go, oh yeah, she's crazy, that's a visionary founder. There's no doubt in your mind. But as they start going through their product and their details, they are so involved and so invested in this thing, and then they just almost like get to a point where they just start blurting it out, right? Where it's like, oh my God, this is amazing because we're going to solve this. Because to them, they have been spending their entire lives basically focused on this. And this founder, basically, the entire thread throughout her life is this focused on this one problem, basically, right? So for her, it's everything, right? But then you kind of stop forgetting that other people haven't been around the industry that long. They have other things. They're not as obsessed about this as you are. And so you start getting into where they just start vomiting out, that's one strategy, right? Vomiting out all the information they have, and it just ends up getting lost, where you're almost like where the investor or say, people be selling to it going, well, is it this part, or I can see this, right? It ends up being very complicated. Or they try to put it into a standard pitch deck or something. And I gotta say, I've read a lot of these now that are just horrendous, right? They're just that aren't good, where it's like, you're not really structuring this. Like, yes, you told me what it is, but you never got to a point where I care, right? So it's almost like this, you get wrapped into your own world. You start seeing it from your own, you're seeing it only from your own eyes. And then you're constantly getting misconnections along the way, right? Where you talk to an investor and they should have been perfect, but they didn't hear the right thing, so they moved off. Or you talk to a client who should be great, but they're just not that excited about it, right? And so you end up getting these constantly mixed connections, and it ends up riding on a lot of these founders, where it's like, and everyone else around them is like, what the fuck's wrong, right? We got a great product. It seems to work. We know it solves a big challenge. So why isn't this working? Right? That's where they get that, and that's often where they kind of throw their hands up and go, I don't really know what's wrong at this point.
Yeah, it's the fundamental issue that people don't understand is we spend way too much time talking about how it works and not enough time talking about what it does. And what I mean by that is when people think about what it does, hey, here's a discrete list of product functions. It does these things. It's like, no, that's not what it actually does. What it actually does is the outcome that is generated, the problem that is solved by your thing. So when you focus on the thing from a technical perspective, you end up saying like, oh yeah, well, the iPhone, it has a PCI bridge that connects the memory to the thing. It's like, no, you can call your friends. You can get on Twitter, right? That's what it actually does. How does it do that? It doesn't matter. No consumer other than some specialist weirdo cares what is going on inside of the black rectangle, right?
And there's a crazy thing too that happens. Sorry for cutting you off, but it does. People will say, "How does it work?" And a founder will hear, "Tell me all the details about all this technically works." What they actually mean is, "Why does this matter to me?" When you say, "How does it work?" How does it work? It's trying to do, I mean, well, okay, it's like a mix there. A little bit should be a convincing explanation to get you to the next point that yes, this actually is work. It's a trust building activity. But the really bigger overarching thing is trying to figure out, but why does this actually matter to me? It's always coming back to that. I'll go back to you now.
Yeah, there's one of our clients, Julia Barzik, has a company called Wise Investigator. This is a little bit non-standard of a client for us. It's not her bread and butter, but she teaches university researchers how to get grants, right? And there's this concept that she taught me about called the hidden curriculum. And the idea of the hidden curriculum is that there is a set of invisible social rules and subtext and nuance that some people learn and some people don't, right? And if you go into stuff, and I think this is really common, I don't know if it's necessarily because like engineering oriented people are very literal, or they, maybe lack certain social understandings or stuff like that. But with what you're really doing in sales and pitching communication outside of the pitch itself is a lot of like cultural subtextual communication of status and authority and value. And when you realize there's a second conversation that's going on that is not what is literally being said, and being able to navigate that second conversation is more important than the actual like explicit conversation, that's when you start really understanding what's going on with pitches, right? So for example, if I gave you two companies, one of which I say, well, this company is really interesting, it has technology that really changes the way that we build car seatbelts. It makes it a lot more efficient to build car seatbelts. And here's how we do that. We have a machine that instead of like weaving it together, it just 3D prints it or something, and it makes it 10 times faster, right? Okay. That's typically how founders are pitching what they're doing. They're explaining, yeah, we have this thing, it solves this kind of problem, but it does this in a technical way, whatever. But really, if you're pitching the seatbelt machine, right, you have to say a bunch of stuff that's extraneous to that, that really doesn't concern how you're doing this, right? But saying, hey, there's this massive market opportunity. When we, with our clients, break down how you constitute a market opportunity, you break it down in terms of an economic, technological, and social opportunity. Meaning, economic opportunity means someone can pay for it. Technological opportunity means it's feasible to do this thing. And socially, somebody has to want it. If you have two of these things, you don't have an opportunity. If people can pay for it and it's technically possible, but nobody wants it, then you make that stupid little AI box that I don't know what it does, right? But like they could.
No one does.
Yeah, nobody knows what it does. The little rabbit thing, it's dumb, right? Nobody wanted it. Nobody asked for that. So it's not, even though they could do it and they got it funded, there's no market. Similarly, if you have the technology and people want it, but it's not economically feasible, like you theoretically could feed everyone in the world if you wanted to, and people would love that, but nobody will pay for that. It's not going to happen, right? And you can assume the third one too. That's how it works. When I'm pitching the seatbelt machine, I have to explain the market around the seatbelt machine in such a way that I'm explaining there's somebody could pay for this, there's money for it, it's technologically feasible, and people want this, right? And if you are a technical founder, then you think it's technically feasible, but you often miss communicating that there's a social demand or an economic demand for it, right? And when you start thinking in this kind of abstract way about, it's not really about what you're saying, it's about what you're conveying, it's about the subtext, it's about the other things you're communicating, then you become much more effective, because it is not, the world is not as literal as you think it is. And I don't know, I'm a literal thinker, so this is something I had to learn the hard way. And I see this with a lot of people. They think, oh, well, I have a good idea that solves a real problem. It should just work. And it's like, if only it were that simple, if only it were that easy. you know?
Hmm. No, and when you start talking to folks, I mean, it's almost like to a level of cliche, yet no one does it. So it's, I guess it's not a very good cliche if no one does it. It's that you have to think about the audience. And this is a constant evolution. That this is a constant game you have to play because like it changes based on who you're talking to, right? I mean, that's the thing. If you're going to be talking to an angel investor or you're going to be talking to a VC, that's one type of audience and they have one set of needs. If you know you're going to be talking to a customer, that is another set of needs. If you're selling big B2B projects, you also have to be aware of like, that group. There's like the way you talk to a gatekeeper is going to be different than how you talk to the actual decision maker is how you talk to, the CFO in the organization, right? Different audiences, they're different tunes. And so ideally what you're doing is you kind of have this matrix in your head of here's what I know I need to say, and here's the details that I'm going to get down, and here's the right person I'm talking to. So I need to make sure I hit these points, basically, right? That's really all a pitch is what you're doing at the end of the day. It's just really coming up with a list of, and I'm going to hit these points in this manner. And if I do that, that maximizes my opportunity of getting the result, whether or not it's an investment, another meeting, whatever it looks like. But of course, here's the trouble. Most founders don't know their products well enough or actually, no, that's not right. But there is something to it. Most people don't know how to talk about it well enough that they never even get an opportunity to do that. So bring this back to kind of the main topic here, which is, so if founders struggle to do this and they kind of do the word vomit, what's the alternative to this, right? And what we find is that basically the founders who we end up helping the most or end up getting the most value out of what we do tend to say they end up feeling like they got super clarity, right? And what that means is basically it's that you slowly work through the process of stripping down the organization to get it down to its bare bones. You tend to look at what are the core things that actually matter here. Who are your customers? What's the big impact in the world? Why do people buy, et cetera? And then it's almost like once you get all the founder muck out of the way, all the things they need to be able to run the company and do this and be involved and get down to that bedrock, you can then kind of start to rebuild it up from the perspective of, okay, we're talking to investors, so we know we need to hit these points. So out of these building blocks, how do we do that? So actually, Garrett, you're the master at this. I'm only starting to get good at this. So what exactly does that process look like?
Process to do specific.
Or at least let's talk about to get clarity, right? And do that. Because
Yeah,
there's a number of ways we do this, but that's kind of what we're always doing here.
it's so there's a couple different angles, like basic things that you need to understand, right? In the most essential framework, the a business is a system that solves a specific problem for a specific person repeatedly for money, for a profit, right? Um, a specific problem and a specific person, when you combine those two things, you have your ICP. Like we like to say ICP squared equals person times problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get really clear about the person that you're trying to help and what problem that they have, you can then start defining your solution in the context of that person and their problem, right? The iPhone, it doesn't matter how the iPhone works, right? The iPhone without a problem is irrelevant. This just happens to be a box that solves an infinite number of problems, right? So it's contextual, right? You get at the same person with three different problems. The iPhone can solve all three of those problems. Your problem is you need to call your mom, you need to get on Facebook, you need to send an email, right? It does all of those things. If I was marketing it to a specific person with a specific problem, I'm going to have different messaging relative to those things. You can have different people with the same problem and you're going to market it differently, right?
Oh, yeah.
Marketing.
And actually, I want to go through an example here, or not an example, but a thought experiment. All right, we keep going back to the iPhone because that's literally one of the best pitches that's ever been done ever, right? And it's great and it's wonderful. Well, let's imagine they did it the dumb way. Let's imagine they just try to pitch it, whatever. If I had to guess how they would pitch it, it would say, it's a computer that you hold in your hand. That's probably what they would do. It's a computing device. Look at this beautiful computing device. It's got a screen and you touch screen. It would be all feature jump, right? Or whatever. And it would go into the features and it's like, and it's got the fastest gigahertz, whatever. And it's got Wi-Fi and we got, some partnerships to make this. And we got
no, because they do that, but they do it like a feature exists to solve a problem, right?
I
So
yes.
that's the thing, you have to contextualize it, right? It's not about it being fast. It's about it being the fastest way for you to get in touch with your family, or the fastest way for you to get work done on the go, right? The features are relative to the importance of a feature is relative to the importance of the problem that it solves. And a feature in and of itself floating in the void is irrelevant. You don't understand the context of it, right? If you are not if you're not somebody that knows what writing is, a pen and its many features is irrelevant to you, right? If you're illiterate, you probably don't need a pen, right? So you have to have a specific problem. Like every tool exists to solve a problem, and a business is nothing but a tool for solving problems, right? At the most abstract level, it's usually a tool that provides tools to solve problems, right? But it's the tool for the distribution of tools for problem solving, right? So I think that ultimately that's the thing you just have to drill into your head. So you can look at it like as far as focusing on the person and the problem that you're solving. That is such a critical thing. I think that I don't know, that feels reductive and like super obvious, but you'd be surprised by how little when people struggle, they forget to do this basic component because you're focused on other stuff. You're like, how do we build the pen? How do we get the supply chain for the pen worked out? What are all the, how do we use carbon fibers to make the strongest pen in the world, right? It's like, okay, that's cool, but that's not what sells the pen, right?
Right.
So the other thing you have to look at when you're thinking of the sales is not just the person, the problem, but and this is, I guess, more so with pitching, but the incentive structure around what is going to make somebody motivated to do what you're looking to get them to do, right? If you're pitching, what set of information and criteria have to exist for the investor to think it's a real opportunity, right? Because if you're an investor and you have your money sitting in the bank somewhere, like it's accruing, interest, their money is not going to make them money unless you make them money with it, right? But for that to happen, you have to communicate that the opportunity has certain criteria, right? You have to be a company that's investable. Your cap table has to be not screwed up. Your market cap has to be large enough that they could theoretically get their 10x or 100x return on you. There's a lot of things that go into it that actually don't really have to do with the product in and of itself. Like your product has to be good enough to solve the problem, but that is not the criteria that makes something investable, right? There are a lot of products that solve problems that are not investable, right? Because they don't have all this other stuff. Market demand. They don't have the scaling ability. They're not that kind of company, right? A laundromat might be a great way to make money and it solves a real problem and everyone knows what it is, right? You never have to explain how a laundromat works. It's actually I think somebody said one of the most stable, profitable types of businesses you could ever operate. It's recession proof. It always works. But that is not what makes it investable with a VC, right? It's not, there's no version of a laundromat that's going to be a high scaling company. Unless somebody figures out a different model for it, but it seems to be basically ironclad bedrock. It is what it is. Right. So it's important because you can use that as an example. I love the laundromat as an example because it's the opposite of a technical product. Everyone knows what it is. The business model is completely solved. It's done, right? When you're pitching, it's all the things that are difficult about pitching are things that are not difficult for a laundromat. So when you understand the difference, right, you're usually trying to explain something that people don't get that's new, that doesn't have a solid business model yet. And unless maybe you're doing SaaS or something like that, but you're trying to think, how do we market this? Maybe if we change the model, maybe if we do a subscription instead of a one-time sale, we can be better at scaling. We have a recurring revenue stream or something like that, right? So I think it's important, to understand that it isn't just about your product or service. It's about the context around it and how that context is communicated to convey that there is an opportunity.
So how do they how do they get to that? I mean, here's the thing. I think a lot of founders will hear that, and I think a lot of them certainly understand that, right? I mean, our line, our tagline, basically, it's hard to grow your business when you don't know how to talk about it, connects with people. They understand that. what is it they're actually getting though? Like, and what I mean by that is when they talk to us, like, how are they getting to that? And what's the process to make that happen? Because obviously, so many founders are in their own head. It's almost seems like it's very hard to get out and go, how do I talk about this? So what happens there?
Yeah, I think one thing that's very helpful is, and you could obviously do, your mileage may vary depending on who you talk to, but you can always talk to someone that doesn't understand what you're doing, right? Part of our value prop is we're smart enough to understand what people do. We are not experts in the field and thus don't understand it to the degree that they do, because you get hit with the curse of knowledge, right? It's the opposite of Dunning-Kruger, basically, or it occurs in conjunction with like the Dunning-Kruger curve. When you know too much about stuff, you are cursed with the knowledge and you don't know what it's like to not know it.
Yeah.
When we are talking to someone and we are smart enough to understand what you're doing, we could, like read some crazy complicated things that we help people understand. We don't know all the inner workings of it, and it wouldn't work if we did, because then you're talking to another expert trying to pitch it like an expert pitches, which is not how you want to pitch. You want to be the expert at the problem solving, not the expert in communicating how the product functions. You're not teaching
Right.
me, right? So being able to talk to somebody that doesn't understand the inner workings of it, the things that make me light up when I'm listening to someone talk about their company are very different than the things that the founder is typically excited about, right? And so, like with BQP, when BQP was telling us about, this is a company that does quantum algorithms for computational fluid dynamics modeling of aerospace engineering, very, very complicated stuff. When they're talking about it, they're explaining, oh yeah, we can do all this stuff. We can model like what a quantum computer looks like with a different kind of algorithm that runs on normal computers. Like, that's cool. It's confusing. I don't think
Here's the thing. I'm very impressed.
Oh yeah, it's
not necessarily in a place
wow,
that
those guys are smart. This is amazing, but like I don't understand the importance of it. But then, like in the same breath, when they're getting excited about this, they're also like, oh yeah, and it happens to be, it makes you save $1 to $2 billion on aircraft manufacturing. It's like, what?
wait. Yeah, you're right. We'll have
how you did it. If you did that, that's the cool part.
I think that's the point, and I think that's what's crazy, because that has happened so many times in a meeting where we'll be sitting there and it'll be our third or fourth discussion, and then all of a sudden just some fact gets thrown on the table, and I'm going, wait, stop. They save $1 billion. Yeah. Like a legitimate fee, right? And
just say
right,
that.
Right, do it. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's where a lot of us, where it's helpful to have somebody to talk to there, because they can go through and say, that's the thing that actually matters here. Because when you talk to an investor, that is something that's going to make them go, wow, right? It's a big claim. It's a big claim, and they can back it up. And then if you get enough of those together, all of a sudden it starts to look like, oh, we actually have something that looks like really useful stuff. And then basically at that point, it depends on the medium, right? We're very, we're probably in the process of doubling and tripling down on decks, right? Which is, we have our deck process, how you do that. But you take this bits and pieces and go and say, this is the actual relevant thing you need to be talking about, because this is what it does. Everything else is great. It's supporting to the main guy, to the lead actor, who is like, we can save you $1 billion.
Again, it sounds like that would just seem like it would be so obvious that people would just start with that. But this happens time and time again. I've, over the years, talked to hundreds or thousands of founders, and you would be surprised by how often people focus on the wrong stuff. And it's not that the right stuff isn't in there, but the part that you think is the important part to you is not what matters. It's what is important to someone that doesn't get it, right? If the coolest part about this is the M1 chip or something like that, like I have not watched an ad for a new iPhone with any attention for a long time. It's been the same thing for a long time, right? I watched the original iPhone ad hundreds of times because it's great, when Steve is pitching it, but after that, I don't care. Hey, is it serving the need? Is it being a phone that has better UX than Android? I don't like the Android UX. I'm not going to switch, right? Okay, cool. It's serving the purpose of solving my problem. I'm not going to get excited about it. It's not dramatically changing the way one of my problems is solved, right? That, to me, none of the things that are being sold now matter. They're filling the baseline thing is like, is this a reliable thing that sits in my pocket and does what I need it to do? Yeah, cool. Okay, done. It doesn't matter how it works. It matters how it helps you, right? And I think that reframe is so important. We say that all the time. We probably said that like once per episode every time we've done this. But that's the thing that everyone screws up. And I think to dig into that a little bit, there's a distinction between educating and sales, right? When you're in a sales environment or you're pitching, what we often think we're supposed to be doing is teaching people stuff that they're there to learn something. And it's like, not really, right? You can see this if you're ever so actually one of our clients, Mark Anderson, who is the founder of MBH Capital Management. He runs a 0-day options hedge fund. We went to Dallas and he was pitching a room full of potential investors on how his fund works. And he's going through and answering questions. And you could see in the room, this is a very like technical sale. Like, I don't know if you know how options work, but 0-day options are even more complicated. It's insane. There's a lot of
jargon. A technical person pitching to technical experts, right? It's a totally different type of pitch.
But this is important because it still makes the distinction, right? So even in this, which is a high education experience, like these people are ostensibly just coming to learn, right? It is a form of a sales conversation because they're all qualified accredited investors, right? But you could tell in the room, there are different people that are there for different reasons. So one of the guys would ask really long technical questions, and you could tell that this guy was not a buyer. This guy was there to learn how to try and do it himself. So he's asking questions for the purposes of education, like, oh, how do you do this? How does an iron condor work? Which is like a trading thing. Or like, do you using an iron butterfly as opposed to something else? Oh, Cherie's coming in. That's a surprise.
This is office hours with Lucid and friends, so it's nice if a friend shows up once in a while.
Hey, stranger.
Hi, Cherie.
Hey guys, sorry I couldn't come earlier. Had a call go over. Glad you're still kicking, still doing it.
Yeah, we are. All right, finish up your point, Garrett, and then we'll.
Yeah. So to kind of quickly move through that, the difference between the questions that someone who is there to be educated asks and the people that are there to potentially purchase are completely different kinds of questions, and they're answered in a different way. A sales question, usually an objection, is a request for reassurance or some information about how it benefits them or affects them, right? So if I ask you, oh, well, what's the risk profile of your fund? What I'm not asking you is to get into all the technical details about how you're assessing that and you know, things like that. What you're actually,
or how you figure it, or how cool it is that you know how to figure this out, you know, in the most smartest boy, cleverest way ever.
Yes. What they're actually asking is, I want to invest, but this is a thing that's preventing me from doing it. So can you give me a reassurance answer, something here that satisfies my curiosity and makes me feel safe and comfortable that this is a good investment? That's what they're actually asking, right? So being able to understand there are two languages that are being used that use the same words that sound like the same thing, but there are two different kinds of discussions that are happening, often in the same conversation. And being able to move away from, I'm not going to educate you, I'm going to reassure you, is really critical.
Yeah. Actually, Cherie, I'm glad you're here because we're kind of talking about this. So one of the topics we go into a lot is the idea that like it's very hard for founders to go and get clarity because especially when you're so involved in the details, right? And that's usually one of our signals, right? Our pitch, our tagline is it's hard to grow your business when you don't know how to talk about it, right? And that connects people because they know they're not getting it, right? So I know for you, especially when you're doing messaging and speeches and things like that, how exactly do you get founders out of founder mode, right? When they're involved in the operation and stuff like that, because I know you deal with folks like this all the time, and get them into something where you get them on the right messaging. How do you think about that process?
Yeah, so I just had a call yesterday with a client around this topic. So the easiest hack, cheat code, whatever you want to call it, for figuring out that message that your audience will resonate with is to start by thinking about the audience. When I work with my clients, I don't ask them about their products and services in great detail. Like if I know you're in finances, okay, I generally get what you're about. If I know you're in AI and B2B, I generally know what you're about. But once we engage working together, I am drilling very deep into the psychographics of your audience. Because that's it's figuring out what your audience needs, what they want, what their emotional triggers are, what their backstory is, past experiences with other service providers like you. How have they tried to solve this problem in the past? If you don't bring their journey to your conscious awareness, then your message is purely coming from your experience, not their experience.
Mhm.
And the advice that I gave a client, she's got a wave of presentations that she's has coming up. And she very transparently shared with me, she's like, look, I know my shit, but I'm feeling nervous. I'm having self-doubt, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it. And I I shared with her like all of that tangled emotion and thought and feeling like you had clarity, but you lost it comes from you being inward focused.
Mhm.
Get outward focused. Focus on them. Be more concerned with being interested rather than interesting. I also shared with her, I think you guys were talking about like sales calls or investment calls. Um, One of the best skill sets one can have, especially if you're in services and B2B and all that stuff, is to ask quality questions. Through your questions, you're demonstrating experience and wisdom because you're approaching it. You can just tell, like, oh, that's a much more nuanced question than I've gotten from other people. You don't have to educate them, like Garrett was talking about. You, especially if you're in consulting, like myself, but you can guide them down a path to where it magically becomes their own idea that this is the right direction because you know the questions that need to be asked while you walk that path versus, well, let me tell you what step one looks like and two, rather than, well, at this stage, what comes up for you, or how have you tried to approach this in the past, or what worked really well, what failed miserably, why was that?
Mhm.
And now it's collaborative.
Yeah, I want to touch on the questions bit. I think that's a great insight.
Mhm.
Um, when, and this applies to any, even pitching with VCs, when you start asking the right questions, you, especially like when you're, if you're in a sales conversation, you ask a question they've never heard before, you're automatically know more than they do, right? If they didn't think about that, they're like, oh my God, wait, I never thought about
Yeah.
it. You're immediately qualified. And I
Yeah.
think that's the beauty of questions is great questions like that demonstrate authority, and questions in general demonstrate empathy, or at least, you know, personal related questions like, how does that make you feel when this happens, right? Wouldn't it be, would you be more comfortable if this happened? And they're like, oh, yeah, definitely. Because you're starting to like future pace them. You're giving them, if you, what if you felt like this? What if we solved that for you? How would that make you feel, right? But
Mhm.
with pitching, you can ask VCs questions about, hey, who do you, you know, what's your thesis? This is really a good fit for you guys. You typically provide a lot of support to founders. Once you start interrogating them, you're demonstrating you're a serious person, and you're
Mhm.
automatically different from everyone else who's like, money, please, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I want to highlight within those questions underneath what you just said is the act of asking questions generally is the act of finding fit. You're finding if this is the right fit. How do you as the person pitching know if this is the right fit? Well, generally, it's a super smart move to know your values, to know your mission, to know your internal world and the culture you're trying to create, and all that ties into the things that you do so beautifully, Garrett, is drilling down into what do you stand for? Because then that illuminates what questions should I ask to make sure that we are aligned in values, in vision, in the what we want to create and experience in this world. If you don't have that clarity, then you're not taking the lead. Then you're being led by others and just following wherever the dollar signs go. And I get it, I've been there. But the next level is clarity on yourself, your culture, your mission, and then seeking out those right individuals or organizations that are the fit. And then the right questions tend to reveal themselves.
Yeah, that's something that it was a part of Garrett's original process when we did more, when he was doing more brand stuff, and we occasionally do this. The first bit of what we do is always values, mission, stuff there, which doesn't seem like it should, like, that doesn't feel like it should be part of a brand activity, but Garrett put it there. And yet every single time we do it, it's never an easy process. It's not like there's like there's only two people, Garrett, that you mentioned, they're like highly, highly successful that zoom past that activity, right?
Yeah,
I'll let you.
let me
Yeah.
touch on that. So there's one of our when people work with us, if they're doing like a full service thing, we'll go through a series of 4 sprints that are about 2 hours apiece. And in a prior version of my business, the thing that I really focused on was business philosophy, like your beliefs and the internal concept of the company. And it turns out that stuff really matters, right? So I've done the first exercise, the brand sprint, um, it's at least 100 times, probably closer to 200 times now with different people, founders at various stages. And the two people that were the most successful that I've ever done this with, when we did this exercise that normally takes 2 hours, it took like 30 minutes. And they knew all the answers. They knew what their values were. They knew what their mission was. They knew what their vision was. They knew what their brand promises were. They knew about the personality of the brand, everything. It was effortless. They knew in and out what it was. And these people were an exited founder and Michael Jackson's old publicist, right? Who's written like 8 books. Howard Bloom is a very interesting guy. He's like, he was Michael Jackson's publicist, and he also has like written a bunch of books about physics. Super cool guy. So those two people, it was effortless. They knew all the answers, right? And so what I learned from that is it may not be causal, like doing the brand exercise might not be the thing that makes you successful, but certainly by the time you're successful, you will have figured all this stuff out. And so I imagine
Yeah.
doing that stuff and getting really clear on it is one of the steps required to be really successful.
No,
Yeah.
and I think it's that, like, I'm not ready to say it's a law, but it's starting to get close there, which is like pretty much if you don't know how to talk about your business and you have trouble on that side, it's going to be rare that somebody screws up being able to talk to someone and talk to an investor and not get to the right point. And that other part also being crystal clear. Like I would expect that if they're having trouble talking about it, their internal values, their mission, who they are, and what they know at Bedrock usually isn't good as well. And so no matter what, because I think Garrett, like this year, we're realizing the sprint process is going to change based on what we do here. But the thing that's not going to change is now we're probably always going to do values, mission, mission, purpose, just because if you don't understand that and you can't get that basic level down, it's going to be very hard to do things down the line that are, with any sort of clarity, right?
Yeah, and I'd like to speak to the evolution of businesses and how message interacts and sometimes conflicts with that, because as your business evolves, depending on which path you choose of choose your own path, is you will have multiple audiences on your journey. And maybe the message that you had and you were able to talk about it during the first 2, 3 stages of your business because you were speaking direct to consumer or however you started out, as you evolve, now your company has stayed the same. You're still doing the same things for the same people, but now your audience might evolve or have new additions. So maybe now you're speaking to a higher level client who has different types of concerns and experiences that you now need to address. Maybe now you're seeking investors. Maybe now you're at a stage where you're wanting to sell your business and you're needing to go through the due diligence and explain things. So while it feels like I know my business, I know what I'm doing, why am I stumbling? Why am I struggling? Well, your audience changed, and the message that worked and landed with one audience isn't going to land the same way, and you're not going to get the same dopamine hit because you have a new audience. That, it's there's I was thinking of like movie genres and how like one audience that goes to Westerns probably isn't going to Adam Sandler movies or whatever it is because the audiences are different. So you might have different audience genres in your entire journey. And to know that that's to normalize that of like you're not an idiot. Of course you know your stuff. It's just now there's a new variable that needs conscious intention put towards it.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing. There's a cool book that called Crossing the Chasm that talks about the adoption curve. And that's a really specific part of that problem. You have your innovators who understand what you're doing implicitly. Like typically these are people in your field that understand the problem. Your early adopters who don't necessarily get it, but they think it's cool and they're willing to take risks on new products. And then the chasm before you get to the mainstream, right? This is all mapped on a bell curve. So it's like 16-ish% of people are those innovators, early adopters. But like 50% of people, 68% of people are in the middle, and they need a different message at that level of adoption than you need for the people that get it or the people that like it because even though they don't get it because it's cool. So even just as you move through the market, doing the same exact thing, as you reach wider and wider audiences, your message is different. An iPhone is cool for the first person because they're like, oh my God, you fit all that stuff in one box. That's amazing. It's cool for the early adopters because they're like, oh my God, it's cutting edge tech. It's the future of blah, blah, blah. It's cool for the mid-market people because it's like, wow, it's the best phone you could buy, right? And it's not necessarily cool, but gets bought by the late adopters because there is no longer a BlackBerry that you can buy, right? You just can't buy it anymore. You can't buy flip phones anymore. So now you have to get this, right? So the
Not
message,
true, you can buy them. They are out
they're
there.
coming back. Yeah,
Right. But this is
They're
also
making
the
a
same group.
resurgence.
But this is the same group that probably doesn't buy their cell phones at the grocery store and are not drug dealers. So that's the
but I think that's important is that like even in the market as it stands, you cannot address all sectors of the market, even if they have the same problem with the same messaging, because person and problem is the two components of ICP. You need both. And you're different people at different levels of adoption have different problems and they're not the same persona.
Yeah. So in my work, one of the most common things that my clients run into is so my clientele are they are executives and founders who tend to speak. So they're going to industry conferences, doing keynotes, breakouts, panels, even sitting on podcast webinars, that type of thing. And one of those first steps is figuring out event fit. Which event has my target audience? Which event will I get the biggest bang for my buck and the time that I put into it? And sometimes a lot of times, when a client is speaking at an event that's not filled with decision makers, but it is filled with champions. So the people that would take their ideas and, shoot it up the ladder, the reason why they're not getting the ROI and the conversion from those events is because they're using the same messaging that they do on sales calls with decision makers. But your champion's experience of that problem is a very different angle. They're looking at the elephant from a different side. So they're seeing different things. They're experiencing different things. And that's why the champions aren't successfully selling you up the food chain, because you have a mismatched audience and message. But once you make that tweak to make your message match the champion's experience and hit their hot buttons, they will advocate for you to have the conversation ultimately with the decision maker. So, and again, you guys know this, but I'm just a huge advocate. My whole business is built on presence forward marketing. So, marketing and sales opportunities that require your presence. And it bums me out when, because, well, and the reason why is because that human to human interaction has so many benefits to it. And it just bums me out when people give up on it entirely of like, well, that didn't work because they just don't see the dials that they could
Right.
switch on or off as readily or easily as they could with the digital marketing efforts because that information is pretty easy to find online. So that one switch of you can speak at events that don't have a room piled up of your decision maker and still have significant ROI. If you know how to speak to the audience that's in the room, you can still rack up the sales calls. It absolutely is possible.
Yeah, something that you said that I think is really critical for people to understand, especially with regards to those advocates, is your job when you get done talking to someone is that they remember the important part of what they can do with the information you gave them, right? If somebody has a conversation with me at an event, there's a non-zero chance that we're going to talk for 45 minutes about a wide variety of things, right? That's typically, you know what I do when I go to events. I just find people that like riffing about all kinds of stuff. But my goal outside of having a nice pleasant interaction is that they remember when they get done talking to me that Garrett is the messaging guy, or Garrett is the pitching guy, or Garrett is the branding guy. It depends on the context, right? I'm changing my pitch depending on what they say their needs are, right? But if they walk out and they're like, hey, I'm having a hard time with my pitch. Oh, I remember that one guy, he's the pitch guy, I should talk to him. Then I've succeeded, right? And similarly, if you're in a situation with multiple stakeholders, your job is to make sure that those people, your champions, have enough information to remember what problem you can solve for them and be able to enthusiastically explain that to the person that's actually buying, right?
Yeah,
Doesn't
100%.
mean knowing all the details. That means understanding the point, which is,
Yes.
oh, we can fix that.
Yes. 100%. Absolutely. Nice.
Well, we're coming up on time, so we
Yeah.
can probably start closing thoughts with this, wrapping it up. So what do you, Brian, takeaways wise, what do you think the biggest thing that we've touched on today is?
I think it's that Sharia, like your point here, it's like, because again, the thing I'm looking for is what are the things that actually get people to clarity? Like, what's that actual hook that gets them to? Because I think a lot of founders are like, okay, I can believe I suck at this. Now help, right? I think the outward focus on audience is a really key part of it. We approach it from a different perspective, but that's ultimately what's going on. I guess we don't have to ask that because our pitch design or our, I guess our deck design, right, is really all around that idea of we're selling to an investor, so you have to hit these points, so you have to think about it. But that's a good way to get out of your own head to think about it. It's like, well, okay, well, if I am talking to this individual, who are they? What do they know? What don't they know? What are they going to care about or not? And that do that. So that was the one point I really liked from this.
Thanks.
What about you, Sherry?
Well, I came in late, so I don't have as much breadth of material to pull from here, but I think along the lines of what Brian just said is, look, we all know this logically, but sometimes we need to be reminded of it. There is no silver bullet. There is no one, single shot like that's gonna solve all the issues. And to what Brian said is I described my approach and what meets the needs of my clients and create successes, and you guys have your approach and I've experienced it and it meets the needs of your clients in the moments that they're needing it. And so I'm I'm just such a fan of nuanced, multifaceted responses to issues and problems versus touting like, oh, well, this is the way. You start with vision, mission, values. And it's like, yeah, kind of, but you also revisit it at different stages of your career. And same with your message. Your message may have been hitting the bullseye for years, and now you're on a different type of growth path. And so it needs to be revisited. Um, I think a lot of us get into entrepreneurship thinking like, oh, if I get to this stage, I'm good. That's not part of our DNA and genetics. We're always going to look to the horizon. There's always going to be something new, a new challenge that we want. and your message, your branding, your strategy, your operations, it's all going to need to be addressed and readdressed because that's the game you signed up for. So enjoy that part of the journey because it's baked in.
Yeah, 100%. I think the overarching thing really is focus on the person that you're talking to. Like, it's not about you. It's never about you. You are only important to the degree that you are able to help the person that you're talking to. Like, otherwise, why do they need you, right? So I think just if you always return to that, it's not about you. You're at least moving in the right direction. You cannot, if you're focusing on you, you're not going to get answers out of that, right? You already know you. If you were your client, then you can focus on you, but you're not. So focus on them. The person you're pitching, the person you're selling, the person you're serving, that is always the correct answer.
And just because I like this thought, the more you focus on the other person, meaning your audience, your team members, your whoever it is that you're interacting with and wanting influence or collaboration and cooperation with, there are these moments that as if you're focusing on them and their needs, there might be these moments that will shine a light back on you that helps you realize, oh, maybe I'm the problem here. Oh, maybe I need some rewiring, or maybe this behavior or process that worked isn't going to get me to the next level. And so there's certainly room to be self-focused and maybe even a little self-centered, but when it's done in the service of others and the mission, that's when it's aligned and not narcissistic and filled with neuroses, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's a great note for us to end on. So thank you, Sheree, for your surprise appearance. We really appreciate this. You're welcome to join us anytime. And thank you, everyone, for watching. We will be back next week with Chuk talking about most likely community. We're still working on the topic, but we got a special guest next week. He's a great time. So we'll see you then. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
I
Take care.